past, we had done different events for this month, the essay contest and things like that. But this time she wanted to do something a little more intimate. And so, so this is what we have here today. You know, so we're gonna have a bunch of different, different guests, different presentations. I'm gonna give you an idea of some of the things that happen in this building, as well as other things that happen around the Virgin Islands over time. Also, we have a bunch of young people here today, so I think this will be great for them as well. I think a lot of times when we think about history, we think about a long time ago. Well, we're making history every day, so you got to remember that. So, so I also want to thank, let's start off, Amy. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Anything for you guys. We're huge supporters of Team Alaska.
Yes. So Amy, Sean, the whole crew at BPNR, thank you very much for this. With no further ado, I would like to bring on Congresswoman Stacey West.
Good afternoon, everyone. Right here?
Yeah.
Oh,
you can
the
come
camera. Thank you guys for coming out on a Sunday afternoon. This is a really opportunity for us to be with one another, to acknowledge our ancestors, to learn about our Virgin Islands history. I'm so happy to see the young people and thank those individuals who really organized it and those who are going to do presentations. So many of you are in all the other organizations. I didn't see Nadine. Is Nadine here?
She's here.
Martina and Senator Cousin Myra Jackson. Thank you so much, and all the others that are going to do the presentations. This is really very dear to me. I'm a history major. I was a history major at Georgetown, and so history, I think we live history all the time. And without knowledge of our history, we can't go forward. I don't believe. I think we become a stuck people. And I also so very much wanted to keep the amazing history of our Virgin Islands alive. And I think that the fort is really a very important piece of that, and understanding its complexities and the good and the bad of the fort and what it has meant to different groups of people over time. Next week, we're going to be doing the same thing on St. Croix at the WIM Museum at the Great House there. And I think that will also add some dynamics to our history as well. We are also going to be videotaping this. This is going to be available on social media. I'm hoping that our young people will be able to see what their history is and how they can live and support our history going forward. And again, thank you all so much. You guys are the guardians and the keepers of our histories and moving us forward. So thank you so much for coming out today.
Excellent. So first up, we're going to have the Bambula group from F. Muller Elementary School. Organizer is Miss Mercer, Miss Louise Mercer. Wiley set up we do have Miss Ellen Francois here, who's a hired school teacher, educator. So thank you for coming. First, Mr. Felipe Ayala.
I hope you guys know you're not going to be staying in your chairs all afternoon, you know. We want everybody getting up and getting around as well. So make this interactive.
Yes. I don't know if any amateur have blood current shell, right? But them young ones that could do that, hey, yeah. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. That was wonderful. So next up, we're gonna have a friend of mine, somebody that I grew up with and work with my parents in different capacities. Like Davis is gonna have a little story time. Yeah, story time. I want to have a little bit to eat in the guys, I mean, if you want, let's find it, let's go be cozy. That's why we have no microphone because we can around and still in like someone said.
I know that. Brother Law would be a Reverend Urban George of the Amish Church. So that she'll keep me on target so I don't feel much like. Because they're for folk storytelling in the Virgin Islands has its roots back in West Africa, in Ghana, particularly the Asante or Ashanti people. Many of you are familiar with Anansi, but in the Virgin Islands, it's realized Brunansi. And that's one type of story, Jubi stories. And then we also have the legends and songs, and it's a wide variety of stories. And then you have various roles in these stories. Some are used to enlighten, some are used to scare in order to modify the behavior of people. And it's for a variety of reasons that people told stories. But a lot of it was really and this one particular story I'd like to share with you is called How Goat Escaped from Brunansi. Because you see, way back when fowl had teeth, I mean, they didn't have teeth, or they did have teeth first. Now they don't. But back when they had teeth, you see, you had a situation where Brunansi and Goat, they were good friends. But it so happened that they had a nasty cross out and falling out. And Brunansi make it clear, he said, before worse come to worse, I'm going to get your back. He didn't like the fact that Goat win the cross out. Well, that's money. Okay. Another drops. Well, it just so happened that while Rugot was out in this lovely pasture eating wild salmon, guinea grass, and things like that, he didn't matter too much we catch and keep because that was choke. Well, Rugot didn't like to bathe. And if you ever smell a rambo, then you'll understand. Well, it just so happened. Rain clouds start to form. And Rugot didn't see it at first, but when he noticed it started to get a little dark, he realized, well, look up, you see the cloud. You know that one had some rain in it coming. Well, Rugot start moving away. But the rain come down, man, in deluge on top of it. And he take off running. First house he come up to was, guess who? Nancy. Well, Nancy was so delighted when he see Rugot leaning up hard against the house trying to get away from the rain. Rugot fix up something inside and he rushed to the door. Rugot, that's you out there? Come in, man. You come in. Come in. But somehow Rugot did like how we said, you come in. But he wanted to get away from the rain. So he gone in. So as soon as he gone in now, out come Rugot, man, with a ukulele. This a ukulele?
No.
This a guitar. Let me tell you, see, you know your thing, so that's good. Well, all of a sudden, Nancy starts singing. I thank the rain for sending me meat from the bush into the house. I thank the rain for sending me meat from the bush into the house. The man Rugot so like the rain. He said, man, do it one more time, man. He said, I'm coming. But this time, Nancy rushed in the kitchen. He had a pot on the stove. So he threw in some carrot, some turnip, some kohlrabi and thing. Because they don't take a little long to cook. And he come back out. You want to hear it again, Putru? And man, he started. I thank the rain for sending the meat from the bush into my house. I thank the rain for sending the meat from the bush into my house. And Nancy said, look, just give me a minute. I'm coming right back. Rush back in the kitchen now. Man, he throw in some chibble, parsley, thyme, and thing in the pot. And he come back out. And he started to sing again. I thank, by the way, are you bright, right? I thank Bro Rain for what?
Send them in.
From where?
Out the bush.
Where?
Into the house.
So I want to hear you this time. I thank Bro Rain for sending me from the bush into the house. I thank Bro Rain for sending me from the bush into the house. That man. Who God say, for sending me? Nancy said, man, you don't think too much, man. Give me just a minute, man. Nancy had some potato. He had to go in. He had them done peel, you know. Chop them up quick, throw them in the pot in the air. Bring it on, Mr. What do you think it was? Rugot realized what Bro Rain said. Put down the door and take off running. And Bro Nancy run out. He had pat fork and pat spoon and knife and thing in his hand. And when he see Rugot, he said, Rugot, where you going? Come. But he running behind him with a knife. When Rugot look back and see that he's faster, he took off running. Well, it just so happened. Rugot come to a big, beautiful stream. He didn't know what to do right away. But then he remembered, he had some other little pink, glittery dust in it. Inside packet, haul it out, sprinkle it over himself. You know, he turned into a beautiful pink pearlite looking stone on the ground. Well, when Bru got reach over the little hill and down, he looking wrong. He ain't seeing nobody. But then he see Bro Dog, you see Bro God? Bro God had done turned into what? So Bro Dog answered, yes. Where he is? Well, take out a British stone and throw it across the river. And you will see God. Well, Nancy said, oh, yeah. And he grabbed up the pretty little stone, pitch it up in the air so high. Next thing you look, 2 hair pop out, 2 hands pop out, 2 foot pop out, 2 other foot pop out, a tail. And when you look, Bro God land on the other side. And Bro Nancy said, oh, God, look what I had in my hand. And I threw it away. We'll bend.
Story end.
Now take a pen and write your name. When you got an opportunity in your hand, don't throw it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so right now we're gonna take a quick short break. We have some water in the cooler. We have some goodies set up for you guys inside. We have a quick bite. And then while that's going on, Mr. Batty's gonna set up a little tap demonstration. While you all snap it. Get on up and follow me.
know a couple, but everybody has no idea. Those are people that make contributions to the whole culture. Nobody knows about it. And I was going to mention too.
You might have a chance to speak it. If you do it, how long you think it'll take?
I don't know. I have to cut it short, like 2-3 minutes.
Please. Come check this out. Okay. Well, like I said, while you can watch this while again. Okay. So guys, any of you guys know what Mr. Baptiste have in his hand?
Oh, what's happening? Because it's literally saying at top,
Let me get close up. They gonna hit it when they hit it. So no, I always know that they're throwing out part, but I never know the pickup. I never see the pickup piece. That's smooth. And who made those? You make them?
No.
Who used to make them back in the time? Where is it? Oh, okay. Try this one more time. Try it out. Yeah. Yeah. So you can show one how to try. Okay, okay. So you want me to, young lady? Oh, you can. Oh no, you gonna go and point it on. You gonna try to point it on hand. Ain't white enough. You must be little. So now hold it. Let me show you how to start it. Hold on, Mama. Yeah, let me show you how to start.
Tomorrow.
Slide your hand back a little bit. So hold it there. Hold it right there. Okay, and then yeah, now yeah, there you go. Okay. Now you know how to try it now? You're left-handed? Good try. So for those of y'all who were not able to attend in person, here are some of the goodies you're missing out on. We have some local tea and fruit punch. There's raspberry hibiscus. And we have a bunch of Johnny cakes and pâtés. Salmon balls. Fruits to pick up saltfish and so. Wish y'all could be here to join us for some of the goodies.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, you get moving along with the program. So I hope you enjoyed the goodies. I mean, of course, you'll come back and enjoy some more. We still have more in there, so please don't leave anything here. I don't like to go home with anything. Good. So I hope you all enjoyed that. Yeah, so coming up next, we're gonna have some historical highlights for Christian and Nadine Martina Kent. I'm sure she can give you a little other stuff too, and be prepared. She might ask you all some questions. All right, y'all hear, young people, y'all hear that? Miss Martina Kent may ask you all questions at this part, so she's gonna lead this tour of the fort. So you might have to get up in a little bit and follow along. All right.
Good afternoon.
Let's do that again, because I think my Sunday voice. Pleasant good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We are here on sacred ground. Into this space, there is a feeling that you should get of your history and your understanding of a place. May 25th, 1672, a boat arrived from Denmark. The other boat had come and left. The boat arrived from Denmark called the Pharaoh. It arrived in the Gregory Channel. When it got there, it was evening time, and they decided that they would not get off at nighttime because they wanted to be able to see. They just knew there was a lot of bush and grass and so forth. They knew from the time that they had been here before that they had tried to put fort up where Louvert's castle is today. That was too steep, and range for firing on any ships coming into the harbor. They had planned to lay at this space, the fort, the fortification that would be the fort that we sit at now. Unfortunately, on their way over, one of the many people who died was their architect, the person that was supposed to be in charge of building this space. So in 1672, August, Governor Jürgen Iverson made a determination that he would trade an enslaved person named William for someone. Someone who he needed to build this space. So you're going to have to rise today. Because they're going to sort of touch the walls. Because he built this space. Do you have a name for that person? No name? Master Mason. Simon Lamar. I want you to remember the name because on your handout, I did not put names. Simon Lamar. He was an enslaved from St. Eustatia. He was a mulatto, which meant that his mother was enslaved. He came here and started to build this fort. Basically, the outline of this fort, the outer walls are the walls that he built, along with, and everybody, let's go. snap is over. Snap. She doesn't want to be like.
Huh? Oh, she does. Oh, okay.
This was a space like no other. It's outlined. It's a tower that sat in the middle of the walls. Very similar to Fredericksburg or the tower that is at the Ritz Castle. This became the space where they stored things originally. It became the space where the enslaved Africans were held. It's a tall tower. When you look at what Camille Pizarro painted of the fort, he painted from the outside, and you see this tower rising in the fort. Silent Lamar. We don't have pictures of him, but he was able to gain his freedom, and which that shows up in the 1688 census. So that means it could not have been that many slaves that would be brought to this fort. The enslaved came in 60. They arrived at 16. The Danes arrived in 1672. The first ship with 103 enslaved directly from Africa, 1673. So yes, they were here and they built this space. Second person you have on your list, July 1683, a French captain. He gets off his ship. He's actually a pirate. Gets off the ship after he had done damage to the British Armada. He's French. Where does he come? He runs right into this fort. To the residence area to see Governor Adolph E. Smith. Right behind of him are the Brits, not pleased at all. Charles Carlyle of the HMS Francis comes to this fort and asks for permission to speak to the Governor General. He says, "You have a pirate in here, you're harboring him." He says, "I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea what you're talking about. We're not harboring anybody here." He said, "Oh yes." And so, because he would not get any reprieve, he said, "Give us John Hamlin." John Hamlin, pirate. He says, "Give us John Hamlin." And he would not. They wrote letters. And he says, "Don't do anything to the ship because the ship belongs to the King of Denmark. We have seized it." The Brits knew better. And they burned the troops out in the harbor to the water's edge. In the meantime, Governor E. Smith would give him, John Hamlin, boxes of supplies, armaments, and ammunition, and have him escape to Mosquito Bay. Limburg Bay today. Yes. Also on your list, August 1738. Now you see the Moravians had arrived in 1732. And they believed in the idea of pietism, which means that you would come to God through your own understanding and your own reading. And so they made a decision to teach people, the enslaved, and they got permission to do so, how to read. They printed books in the language of Dutch Creole. Books were ABC readers and New Testament sections of the Bible and Psalms as well, Old Testament. And so with that, there were missionaries. They would go around from place to place. There came a lady. The picture is there. Her name is Rebecca. Rebecca was to be married, black sister, to another missionary. He was white. She was a former enslaved. The other missionary married her. So Martin married Frudlick, last name Frudlick. And they were told that this was not legal because Martin, the one missionary, did not have permission to marry the other two. And so the other two were not to lay with each other. And so they arrested them. She would be staying in this area of the fort. Rebecca. Rebecca was to stay here by herself. Her husband would be on the other side with the other missionary. Here they stayed on the lower level of this fort. Yes, it was quarters for women and quarters for men. Prison, so it wasn't done. Yes. And they were to go and be tried for the reasons that they had supposedly done something illegal. So what happens next? Brought out of this space and brought to this area of the fort. Imagine her fare. She had been enslaved and she could be re-enslaved should she be found guilty. She was brought to this area of the fort, told, and this is since then now they've moved out of this area, the church has moved out and so forth, and she's brought to here. And she's found guilty along with her husband and the other missionary. Matthias Freudlich, his wife Rebecca Freudlich, and Martin, all found guilty. She is punished to be re-enslaved and sent to St. Croix to perform hard labor. And there to be sent to Denmark, where they will stay and serve their time out there. Rebecca is the first Black missionary to the Moravian church, and she is memorialized in the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. In fact, she's one of the first people you meet when you start that tour. Rebecca. Thankfully, the head of the Moravian churches arrived here and asked, "Where are my missionaries? Where are you?" The governor said, hold on. And he releases them so that they can give a report of their mission. They're never to be imprisoned. They get on the boat and they go back to Europe, or they go to Europe. Unfortunately, after she has a child, her husband dies, and so does the child. And so she is there. She eventually marries another missionary named Proten, and she eventually dies in Africa. Rebecca Freudlich Proten. The next person on your sheet is a US Senator representing Rhode Island, the great state of Rhode Island. But you see, before he became a senator, and while he was a senator representing Rhode Island, He was a slave trader. And that slave trader killed several of his enslaved on the ship on the way back to the United States. What does that mean? And why are we caring about that? He's charged with murder and he's tried here in this place. He is charged with murder in Rhode Island. He's on his way from Africa coming through. And they say, wait, no. And they stop him here. He's hidden in St. Lucia for a long time. He wants to come back to the United States. He stops here and they try him here. He unfortunately, or fortunately for him, I guess, is found not guilty and is allowed to go back to the United States and becomes the US Senator representing Rhode Island. You remembering all the names?
You didn't get his name.
No.
What was his
You
name?
did not get his name? What are you
No.
writing it down?
No, but I'm remembering it.
His name, it's gone out of my head. Let's go back. His name is James DeWolf.
Wolf.
James DeWolf. Okay.
Mr. Wolf.
Now you've been hearing about people that is in the history books. I want to tell you about somebody who's not. He spent some time right in that particular circle right there. His name was William. William was an African born in 1773. He came to the Danish West Indies, specifically St. Thomas, enslaved. In 1803, they had a census of the free people of color of these islands. Stepped up. I am free. I said, well, how did you get your freedom? Because we need papers. He says, oh, the papers are coming. They're coming from Bermuda because my former owner is from Bermuda. He's a doctor, and so am I. Right? So we good? July 26, 1815, an article appeared in the St. Thomas Today reporting, quote, Negro who calls himself William and says he belongs to Dr. Parsons in Bermuda. If said Negro is not claimed within 6 weeks from this date, he will be sold at public auction.
Wow.
So he's being held in this court. He has claimed, and you will see him in the census claiming that he's a doctor. And it gives you thoughts, because when you think about the enslaved, you don't naturally think skilled, but they came from Africa with skills, right? So these are not people that were, just living in the bush. These are people who were skilled. And so they grabbed up and they sent over, right? So he's a doctor and he's claimed his freedom. And he says it's coming, but by 1815, he gets caught. William disappears from the census after that point until 1850. Tell me why he would show up in 1850.
He died?
He didn't die. He showed up in 1850. What? He didn't show up in 1841. He didn't show up in 1846. He showed up in 1850.
Oh.
After emancipation. Oh, now, hey, I'm back.
I was thinking it, but I didn't remember the date.
In Savannah for that time period. How did he get out? We don't know how we got out. You see, there's such a small space. There might have been other things that happened that would have caused him to be released, because his thing was, or somebody may have come for him and said, he shows up as a person growing herbs for medicinal reasons in the census in 1850. William. He's one of my favorite people. I really like him. When you think about the history of our town, to think about people like that, right? That made their way. Who else is on the list? 1892, September 1892. The coal workers strike, right?
Dollar for dollar.
So all these young people have danced bambula, right? And these coal workers would dance the bambula to keep that 80 to 100-pound basket on their head full of coal. And so they danced to keep that balance and move forward in that way. They wore all white. That picture shows a co-worker on her way back home. She's covered with dust. They drink anisette, fermented drink to cool the throat because they're dying of lung cancer and black lung disease. But in 1892, they had it. They wanted, because the banks had all closed down and said they wouldn't accept the payment that they were receiving. And so they used their economic power. September 12, 1892, they decide that they were not going to put coal on those ships. And so they blew the horn and they didn't come. The conch shell, they blew it and they would not come. Instead, they left out of their homes, Saban, up street, Bakaval. And they came here to this board to complain. They're not paying us dollar for dollar. We need dollar for dollar. The police captain came out and said, calm down. No, we're not calming down. You're not listening to us. And so they went down Main Street, but they came here first to complain and lodge a complaint to the police. Later on, they would come back and they would have a trial. And they kept asking, are you Queen Keziah? Because they had the women here and they said, did you lead this? Well, they had a memory, you see, of the fire burn, which was not too long before. And they know that they had taken Queen Mary and the others and punished them to death. They commuted their sentences, but they were punished to death. So why would they volunteer now to be the leader? But we know that there was one named Clotilda Simonette. Clotilda Isabella Simonette. So the song, roll Isabella, roll Isabella, right? She was put on trial too, and she denied it wholly. So after a while, they just let them go. They didn't have conclusive evidence. So we had that. And then in December of 1935, came another court case led by a master educator herself, Edith Williams.
Yes, Williams.
So, women's suffrage was not a thing here. We were under under the United States, but we were not under US law. We were under Danish law. And so although the women in the United States could vote, we could not. And so there were teachers that stepped forward, business women, women that owned property, because you see the law was that you had to be a person of good reputation. You had to have an income. You had to own property. You had to be a man. But that was not the rule in the United States. And so the teachers and business women stepped up. You had people like Ms. Basholta, Ms. Stewart, and so forth. The list goes on with these teachers. Even my great aunt, who was not a teacher, but owned property and a business, tried to register to vote, and they were turned down. So that happened in November, and by December, they were here in court. Took them 1 month. And they won the right to vote, led by Edith Williams. And I say educator extraordinaire because Miss Edith Williams was the person who brought school lunch into our schools, understood that the whole child was somebody that needed to be taken care of. I'm going to end my talk today. Saying we didn't talk about Sustain Ben, Denmark Bessie. Somebody, you know who Denmark Bessie is? Okay, good, thank you. Sustain Ben Bain is a person who, with his brother, Hernan, two St. Thomians that created ITT, International Telegraph and Telephone, right here in St. Thomas. We didn't talk about the planning of the escape to Cuba, right in this particular jail. We didn't talk about the skills of Mr. Claude Malone, as that photography place for the police was right here. We didn't talk about Dolores Jowers. We didn't talk about Kalito Ken. So you see, so much history happened in this town. That's happened right within these walls. I'm hoping today, that's the last date you see on your list, it's one of those historic moments where today we can mark the moment when we start to enlarge the discussion to gain answers regarding what we define as our history, how we portray our history. When do we teach our history? And to whom do we trust to carry on our history? It is our history.
The people, when we came from Africa, I mean, you mentioned that they taught us to read,
To read Dutch
to
Creole.
read Dutch,
Right.
their Creole, but we could have read
Absolutely.
whatever language that we had.
Absolutely, without a doubt. So they taught us how to read Dutch Creole. That was a combination language of several things, right? And that's a language we still sort of use to today, right? Right? They knew how to read, but to read in this language was a different thing.
I have enough half an hour. When they with the dollar for dollar, when they changed the currency and then what the currency was?
It was Mexican peso, but it was done in a Mexican silver that was devalued throughout the world.
Oh, it had no value.
And so it had no value.
They were
And
putting
so the
them
banks
back,
could not accept
put them real back, setting them back.
Absolutely.
What per load it is?
One.
One peso per
Right. And in addition to that, they had these coins had names of stores. So if his store was a rum shop and your store was a bread shop, but I got pesos in your shop, then I couldn't buy bread from you and I couldn't take the coin to him. So it was enslavement in another way. Any other questions?
Do you have a history book reading list available? I mean, so much of this is new to me and I want to.
Okay, so I
You
have.
did your grandmother proud.
Yes, ma'am.
Proud.
So I see this one. Tells it
a room full of books. There are so for this small space, this small island, these small islands, we have so many books about our history that we could be here for 2 weeks.
We have our Caribbean collection in the library. Okay, thank you.
What was the name of the, you said the city was to
Dende.
Dende?
Was the news, one of the newspapers of the day.
Okay.
I just moved that.
You got any more questions? Miss Marchena, Ken? No questions, children? Big children, any questions?
I have a question. They renovated Fort Christian in the late 1990s. They started for about 3 grades. Inside.
That they were pastors, when they first came, they were dying a lot, quickly, right? So I believe there were these pastors, there were 3 grades right in here. They were right outside the church, and I believe they were pastors.
Okay, so the only church that was ever in Fort Christian was the Lutheran Church.
Absolutely, it was the King's Church.
Okay, and then moved across the street.
Absolutely. And then several different denominations shared churches as things burnt down. They would share churches. And so you would have the Lutheran Danish service. You would have a service in Dutch Creole for the enslaved. You would have a service for maybe the Dutch Reformed Church. When their church burned or when the synagogue burned, they practiced at the Dutch Reformed. So edifices were used by multiple churches at different time periods.
Thank you.
If there are no more questions, thank you very much. Edith Martina, Ken. So last but definitely not least, we have former Senator Myron Jackson. This presentation, go back and fetch it. This is the African Connection. Go to you. Take it away. Sir. Come up a little bit. Come on. The wind is blowing.
Come close, nice close.
Coming close. Stay where you are. You all make us close because I can't be protected out of.
This is better.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Yes.
Yes.
More academic aspects. With a lot of dates and let's try to break it down so that you could have a you can have a better understanding. So we had two or 4 presentations. We had Professor Glenn Fabina Davis. He left. Yes, I think he had another event. All right. And he spoke to the African tradition in storytelling. And he had children's games and what was done by Mr. Baptiste. Still here with us. And we had Ms. Nadine Ken that gave you a historical overview. First of all, I want to say good afternoon to the Congresswoman, Stacey Plaskett, and thank you for holding this conversation because we need more of that. And I know the logistics was not easy, but we commend you and at least attempting to have that conversation and engagement with the community. Because if we speak with each other, we can learn more about our history and culture. It's not a sitting in a classroom. We do not always have that opportunity to do that, nor do many of you have the time to go into the records and the books, and you just want an understanding to the place that you live. We're better informed, we're better citizens of the place that we live. And likewise, our children would know better and have a better history of themselves. So in that regard, I asked to speak about the African contributions to this site and also to the community to which we live. Have that conversation without going back
prior to 1917, so we have to take some steps backward. And Nadine has done a wonderful job in sharing that with us, in taking us back. So I want you to hold on to that for a little bit. So we're in a place that was built in the 1600s. That's quite a long time ago. And it's remarkable that these four walls still stand, and all in between, that we're in a place that was built several hundred years ago, not 200, 1600, 1700, 1800, 1900, we're in the 20s. We're in the 21st century, and this was built in the 17th century. That's remarkable. Not many communities have buildings like this, and we pass it and we really just don't understand the history that's within it. So imagine this building all white. The white that you see under the red paint. That's what it looked like back in the 1600s, 1700s, up to 1874. And this building was all white, and when we were doing the repairs, it was white, and we had a debate. Should it remain white, or should it be restored to red? And the collective memory of this community was that we had generations of Virgin Islanders that just only knew it red. Because in 1874, they changed the color. So they knew nothing about this white fortress. And I said fortress because that's how it began. We know that the date on the building, 1672, is not the 1672 on the outside. It's not 1674.
It's 1671.
Oh, 16, thank you. 1671 is not the date that it was constructed. That is when the second group of Danes left, capitalists, they left and they came to St. Thomas. They arrived there in 1672 and the fort was completed in 1680. Nadine explained to you the African indentured to the Danish West Indian and Guinea Company, did his time here. He was an indentured African, and they were indentured Europeans. And the history of America is based on indentureship or indentured, that it was not restricted in the 1600s to only people that looked like me and looked like some of you. It was everyone within the station of their life. They emptied prisons. People who couldn't pay their debts were sent to the colonies, and that was the same with Denmark. They don't say it much, but that's how this early colony began. They sent men and women who were ladies of the night, and they went there and they were arrested. They were sent to the Caribbean, to the West Indies, and the like. And it was a rough place to live. It wasn't easy. And this building represents the first official government complex in the Virgin Islands. It's the oldest standing building in continuous use of any of our structures, and it's a National Historic Landmark. It is the equivalent to the White House, to the Washington Monument. It is the equivalent to sites throughout the United States, and I don't think that we understand the importance. Fort Christian Vernon, Christiansted, and Fort Frederick likewise also are part of this context of Danish colonial. Now, how did we get here?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You said the West Indies is the company.
Danish West Indian and Guinea Company.
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, the Danish West Indian and Guinea Company, and I have a timeline here. And the Danish West Indian and Guinea Company was established in 1672. Denmark, through newly formed agency, formed the Danish West Indian Company, and it also is the Danish West Indian and Guinea Company, colonized the island of St. Thomas. St. Thomas was decided by Denmark, who the latecomers to the enterprise of capitalism and slavery and trade in the West Indies, was the last European country to come into the Caribbean. And they settled on St. Thomas first, then St. John, and then they purchased St. Croix from the French in 1733. But that is not the beginning of history for St. Croix. St. Croix had already been settled by the French, the Dutch, the Knights of Malta, the Spaniards, of course, with our indigenous history that spans several thousand years before the coming of Columbus. And then Columbus came in 1493 at South River, and then the story begins of European colonization. But our history does not begin with the coming of Danes of 1671. Our history is thousands of years old. And all around these shores, our indigenous people live, and we know so from what we have found. We know so from historical records. Some of us have indigenous bloodlines in us, whether it be Kalinago, which is Carib, Taino. Some of you would, from families from Puerto Rico, they would claim their Taino bloodlines. Some of you are from Dominica. Hello. Some of you are from, have roots in Dominica. Some of you in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we kind of dismiss it, but it's very important because they live within us. They are our ancestors likewise, and they're not dead. So if you think indigenous people are dead in the Caribbean, they are not. They're alive and they're well. They're just marginalized. And if you go to Dominica, you could go to their reservation. If you go to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, likewise, it's the language tradition still struggles, but it's still alive. If you eat cassava bread or bam bam, and that's indigenous. If you eat pasteles from Puerto Rico, that's connected. If you sleep in a hammock, that's connected to indigenous people. If you use the word hurricane, if you use the word canoe, if you barbecue your food, you're practicing indigenous food traditions, and we could go on and on and on. It is not dead. We were made to believe that it was dead and that we no longer exist, but we very much exist. So Africans, did they first come with the first slave ship? And I'm going to pose the question to you. That is not the first time that Africans came across the ocean blue after 1492. Africans were in this part of the world thousands of years prior and had made contact with the indigenous world here. And likewise, there was an exchange of thought, there was exchange of ideas, there was exchange of language, there was exchange of bloodlines. And why we know this? Because archaeological evidence tells us so. And why this is important? Because history has to be rewritten. So Africans crossed the Atlantic prior to 1492. And these islands were the stepping stones for those early colonizations of communities throughout the island chains. Sultima, may he rest in peace, Ivan van Sultima, he writes about this, and he was invited by the University of the Virgin Islands to come and to speak with us about a very important discovery at Hull Bay. Back in the 1970s, I was an intern at Conservation and Cultural Affairs, and the archaeologist Catherine Kay and Bruce Tilden and a couple others were doing a major excavation at Hull. Well, they were building a development They were building a development, and a Jim Norma, I think, was building a condominium complex down in Hull Bay, and several burials were uncovered that were dated pre-Columbian. They were dated pre-Columbian because there was a pottery associated with the skeleton remain in the grave, and when they did the rating for it, the carbon dating for it, it was pre-Columbian, and they assumed that they were indigenous people. Well, when the experts started to look and understand that study human remains, there's a term that they call them, someone who is a scientist in human remains. They were classified as Negroes and not indigenous, that they were Black, they were Africans. And that started a big controversy about the Hull Bay site, so much so that we don't talk about it today. So Bansurtiman, these remains are in the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. So there is this cloud of this history. Some say, well, it was a colonial site that had been contaminated by a later site, and it goes back and forth. So I pose that to you so that you would understand that that question still stands. However, records of the colonial period speak to the accounts of indigenous people that talk about dark-skinned people, Black people coming through and making contacts with them with gold-tipped spears. And when that gold was tested, we know that that gold comes out of what we call Guinea. So the question that the Congresswoman asks about Guinea Company, Guinea is what today is West Africa. So the Danish, West Indian, and Guinea Company is a Danish capitalistic enterprise on the West African coast that traded and did commerce between Europe, Africa, and the Caribbean. And that brings us to this building, why we are here. This building is part of a network of slave castles. And these slave castles, for those of you that have been to Ghana, Senegal, Nigeria, and other places, this is a picture of these forts in Ghana. Now, you can see the similarities between these forts and this fort. They are almost carbon copies. This tower is 1874. So this is out of the question. This is when this becomes a police station. These walls around is when it was a fortress involved in the capitalistic enterprises of human beings, tobacco, cotton, sugar, indigo, and other products, byproducts. That is what this building protected, the interests of those early colonists that established Estate Sugar Estates or Estate Thomas, Estate Bordeaux, Estate Nazareth, Estate Tutu, and we could go on and on. If you live in a place outside of Charlotte Amalie, Estate Hope, wherever you live, it is most likely an estate that was established in the 1600s and the 1700s. So, you know, people try to understand, well, how come St. Thomas? For some people, they don't even think like slavery really existed in St. Thomas. It did, but it was so early because when the Danes came here in 1672, they established these early plantations on St. Thomas, and then in 1717 expanded to St. Croix, and then 1733 to St. John, and 1733 to St. Croix. That the history of slavery in St. Thomas almost becomes a forgotten part of the history of the Virgin Islands. But these are the earliest plantations of the Danish network of plantation systems. So when you go and you visit the University of the Virgin Islands and you're going to Hope, or you're going to Bordeaux, or you're going to Santa Maria, thank you. If you're going to Santa Maria, you're gonna pass an estate called John Brewer's Bay. And it's a shame that we can't do better with it, that preserve that building for prosperity for our children, so they could understand. And the university could do better. And we as a community can, yes.
Who is John Brewers?
John Brewers was a planter. So he got named John Brewers Bay. And some of these estates have the name of the owners, and some are created from the areas that they were, like Bordeaux, France, and the like. St. Croix, the names are romantic, Two Williams, jealousy, yeah. Huh?
Betsy's Jewel.
Yeah, Betsy's Jewel. We could go out and out. Estate with, and walk and rest, So they took it to another extreme. Usually, yes, St. Thomas, it was the name of the planter, what area the planter came from, or association. By the time St. Croix came in 1733, by the Danes, remember, France had owned St. Croix, they sold it to Denmark, and they had the British, the Dutch, the Knights of Malta. That's why they have 7 flags. And St. Thomas has maybe 3 flags. Spain, Denmark, the British, and that's about it. And America, 4. So we did not have 7 flags that flew over St. Thomas and St. John. That is only St. Croix. So back to the story. So the Danes established this fort as a network to these forts. So those of you that have been to Ghana, been to Africa, and visit these, it is important for you to understand the connection between this, and Christiansburg and Fort Frederick and Fortsburg and St. John, because they're one of the same. They're a network of slave forts that were created, which protected the interests of the enterprise, the company, where they held, they collected the taxes. They gave protection to the tongue when a pirate ship or other colonizers were coming in. They would call the townspeople into the fortress, board the door up, and just like you see any of those movies with pirates and the like, this would become a protective area until the conflict was ended. They built 3 towers. You were standing in the one tower there. That outline is the tower, and if you go on the old map, you'll see for Negroes. So our ancestors were kept in the brick areas that are open. That's the actual roof. You understand what I'm talking about? That outline is a tower. And if you've ever been to Blackbeards or Bluebeards, that's what the tower looked like. And in the 1700s, a debate began in St. Thomas, should we tear down the old tower? And there were people like us that said, keep the history, don't tear it down. And there were others, let's modernize, let's keep it moving. This is no longer a fortress, we need a police station. And then they tore down the tower, and this Gothic clock tower was built, and that is the collective memory of that generation and the generations that follow. So if you ask the average person, what color was Fort Christian? It was always red, and it was not. It was white longer than it was red, because all of these slave forts are white on the coast of West Africa. I have not seen one red fort in Ghana. Let's take Ghana specifically. So in 1874, all government buildings took on this red ochre. Fort Frederick was changed. Fort Christiansburg was changed. So red school buildings became, the Van Schulten schools became red. Ochre, which is it's a mineral mixed with a pigment. Yeah, it's a pigment that's added to the paint, but it's not acrylic paint. It allows the building to breathe, and that's why it is so expensive to do. And this could use another painting, and Fort Christian Burn, when you go over, it looks beautiful. The federal government have the money and they just repainted Fort Christian Burn. So their properties always look better than our properties because they have your money to fix it. Okay, and the Virgin Islands government has other priorities and have not put the money into preservation as we would like, but we're working on it. So our African ancestors were brought here. It was sold from what is today the Emancipation Guard. The Danish, West Indian, and Guinea Company had a warehouse and the footprint of Grand Hotel. Everybody know where Grand Galleria is. And if you visit Christiansted and you go to St. Croix, you will see the company house, which is the old post office. Some Crucians would remember as the post office. Some would say it's the National Park office. That is where Africans, our ancestors, were held. They were brought on the action step and they were sold from these properties. And similarly, ours was across the street, which we have lost. But the footprint is still there within some of the foundation walls that still stand. The Grand Hotel and the Emancipation Guard was a public square. So when you came to St. Thomas, you couldn't dock at a dock. You had to take a rowboat, come into the harbor by the old district court building, which is the Hamburg American Cup, and the Vendors Plaza, where the Vendors Plaza is, was actually water, and you came on a landing. And this is how our ancestors came off of these ships, were sold to the highest bidder, went to the United States. That's why you would have a Denmark Vesey that was mentioned. That is why St. Thomas became a notorious slave market, even though the numbers, you would say the numbers are relatively low, but for the time period it was. And then St. Croix became the slave plantation, slavery and plantation society after 1733. The Danes shifted their economy to St. Croix for sugar, for rum, and for enslavement. Not that they didn't have it here at St. John, but the focus was the land and the production of the land, and they used the harbor of St. Thomas as the industry for capitalism. So that is why cruise ships still come here today in the deep harbor, for you to understand. And then when we have this debate about who should get cruise ships, where they should come, St. Thomas from 1700s has been a maritime commercial port, not by our own making, but by our history. And if you don't understand that, you will not understand the complexities of these discussions that we have today that makes us different in each island district, but they come from circumstances that we had nothing to do with, but we were the products of. So as a result of that, Africans were brought in, they assisted, they did the hard work, they cut the trees, they make the charcoal, they were the burden carriers, they built the plantations. They cut the cane, took it to the factory, they boiled the sugar, they made molasses, they made rum, they made sugar, packaged it, took it to the docks, and that was exported to Europe and came back to us as white sugar at a higher price. Can you imagine that?
Yeah. Okay then.
That white sugar in the little cubes, put in your nice tea and so forth, came back at a higher price after your hard work. So cotton was grown here as well. If you go down into subbase on some of the areas you drive around, if you pay attention, you'll see a little cotton tree here and there. It's because of the cotton seeds that was hundreds of years ago that was grown in these very arid areas where cotton was good. Indigo for your blue jeans that you guys wear. That's another product that was made here. And if you go out to Sugar Bay, between Linquist Beach or Smith Bay Beach and Sugar Bay, there is a wooded area. That's an old indigo plantation and St. Thomas. If you go up on the hill, on Raccoon Hill, there's a windmill. If you go up to Solberg, there's another windmill. If you go down to Fortuna, there's a windmill. And if you go down to Bordeaux, there's another windmill. Those are the only windmills we have in St. Thomas. If you go to Annaberg, there's a windmill that's accessible to you and one at Catherineburg that's also accessible, but there are several others at St. John. So they used wind energy. We cut the stone. All this stone that you see here was quarried from the shoreline, from the mountain. If you drive around the waterfront, you'll see all that hillside, that bit stone. They took all that stone out to build these forts. This brick was imported as ballast on the ships. So the ships came with necessary supplies with brick to keep it balanced over the ocean. And they dumped it out, and then the women would go as burden carriers and take the material and take them to construction site. So when Nadine spoke about the coal workers, women in this society have been burden carriers in construction and all aspects, because African women mastered the art. Not only African, throughout indigenous people throughout the world, women, white women, European women, indigenous, African women, they use the head for carrying goods. You go into Europe and parts of Europe, you see women carrying burden their heads for it. They carry the children on their bodies. You know, so women are really strong. Women History Month. So power to the women. Man can't do that. Carry a baby for 9 months, give birth, carry one,
Carry
90
stress.
pounds of coal on the head, put groceries on the head, carry a baby on the back. I don't know how you all do it, but power to you. You gotta give it to them. So this building means much more than a Fort Christian or the Danes' colonization. It is our arrival to these parts of the world. Every Caribbean society have a fort, however big, however small. And of course, the grand ones are in Cuba, Puerto Rico, in the Dominican Republic. You could go down to South America. You know, the Spaniards they went all out. And those structures are huge. And it makes this look like, you know, a recreational facility, or, you know, but it is what we have. And our zones were very simple, but they took a lot of manpower to do. So our ancestors, on their arrival, they were sold to plantations, to plantation owners, and St. Thomas in the early history. I want to read this to you. So by 1801, the town had 3,500 residents, which represented 46.5% of the urban population of St. Thomas. And they had upward of 1,000 buildings between the head of the P Street or the bottom of Bluebeard's Hill to, let's say, around the market square this time. Or let's go to their Catholic Church. Enslaved laborers comprise about 62% of the urban population. African laborers, enslaved and free, were essential to the prosperity of the seaport. They functioned in various occupations that were marine related: porters, stevedores, seamen, caulkers. That's, you know, when you have a boat or ship, those that you had to caulk in between the seams of the wood, otherwise water would get in. Ship carpenters, sail makers, fishermen, wreckers. Those were people like when a ship sank, they would send out, and our family, the Watlington family, were wreckers. And my cousin here, Judith, we have a cousin Roy. He wrote a book about the 1867 hurricane, tsunami, and earthquake and tsunami. And listed in there is one of our ancestors who was a wrecker who was in the harbor at the time after the earthquake. No, after the hurricane, salvaging salvaging the good from the ships. And they were caught in the tsunami of 1867, and one of our relatives died, which was our great-great-great-great-grandfather's son. There were masons, there were mechanics, there were tailors, there were cooks, bakers. I don't know if Nadine mentioned Cornelius. Cornelius was a Moravian. You talked about her, Rebecca, who was a Moravian. And Rebecca, when you see this, when you see blue, it means you're single.
Oh.
So she was single when this, no, she's married. Blue means you're married, pink means you're single. So if you wore a pink ribbon with your cap, it meant that you were unmarried. And if you wore blue, that meant you were married. So the men could look from a distance and tell who was available or who wasn't available. And that was very much the Moravian dress out of Saxony, Germany. They were seamstresses, washers, vendors, cabinet makers, joiners, goldsmiths, shoemakers, tinsmith, blacksmiths. They were multilingual. What do I mean by that? Meaning that you have to remember the time we spoke a Dutch Creole language. Dutch African Creole is similar to Afrikaner. In South Africa, it's in Suriname, very similar. And that language was kept alive up to the 1980s with Alice Stephen, who was our last informant and taught a class at the University of the Virgin Islands with Dr. Sprout. And recently, Gilchrist Sprout and Dr. Sprout are reviving this language so that our children would know how it sounds and could even read it if they so desire. Those of you that are interested or have the inclination to language traditions, or you're just interested in languages. So they spoke German, they spoke Danish, they spoke French, they spoke Dutch Creole, they spoke Spanish, some of them spoke Portuguese, and they were not as illiterate as you think that history may paint them. Because Denmark took a different position on education, Africans had their own hymnals, they had instruction books in Dutch Creole, they wrote fluently, I ain't saying everyone, but it had a fairly literate population. And Brother Cornelius writes a letter to Schimmelmann asking for the freedom of his granddaughter. Imagine an enslaved man writing for the freedom of his daughter to pay. So when you see Africans owning enslaved people, many times it's their family members, and or they're in the system itself where they also own enslaved people. We don't like to talk about it, but it's the reality. So in this time period, there are Black people owning Black people too. Now the question is, what kind of treatment, what were the circumstances? When I'm not here to judge them, and I don't think you are too. So they maneuvered, and Hagar had enslaved people of whom she was wealthy. She had her own money, she had property. She paid off the mortgage after he went to Denmark, and she owned the property, and she passed that property on to her family members at her death. So these Africans became a force to reckon with within the laws that they had to navigate. And one of those families that we know is Edward Wilmer Blight, who was born a couple blocks from here in 1832. Parents was from Saint Eustatia, came to St. Thomas. For whatever reason, maybe the circumstances of Admiral Rodney bombing St. Eustatius and the politics at the time, and they came to St. Thomas. They spoke Dutch. They became members of the St. Thomas Dutch Reformed Church a couple blocks from there. They lived in Long Path, up in Garden Street area. They gave birth to their children. They were baptized in the St. Thomas Reformed Church or the Dutch Reformed Church. And he was intelligent. He was forward in his thoughts of just being a gifted young man, and the pastor recognized that, Reverend Knox, and encouraged them to go to seminary school. And the rest is history. He became the father of the Pan-African movement. I don't think you understand what I mean. It means that from this little tiny island, St. Thomas, a Black boy who was born in the circumstances of slavery, but who was free, whose mother was a teacher and father was a tailor, listed here in this group of professions that Africans provided for this society, found his way to Africa and became a force to be reckoned with and created a movement called the Pan-African movement today. So that Nelson Mandela can link this young boy from St. Thomas to that movement. Kwame Nkrumah could link Blyden. And if you go to Ghana today and you go to the home of the boys who moved to Africa, was invited by Kwame Nkrumah, there is a picture of Edward Wilmer Blyden in his house. That is how large Edward Wilmer Blyden is to the movement. And Liberia, he went to Liberia first because he was denied entry into Rutgers Seminary. And his mother tell him straight up, do not come back to St. Thomas. We sent you away for education. Go get your education, and then you could come. Then you could consider coming. And he was encouraged to go to Liberia, which was an outpost of Africans returning to Africa. It was an experiment, because there were planters, there were white Americans who said, send them back to Africa. And Liberia became that experiment. He didn't do well there. He exiled himself to Sierra Leone, where he died in 1912, but he was a force to be wrote extensively. His works are well recorded. His books are still available. Islam and the Negro Race. There's some my cousin she shared with me today, one that he speaks of the basically the Negro contribution to the Nile Valley. This is back in the 1800s. So Edward Wilmer Blyden is our own, and we should really, you see the sign there, but please really don't take him for granted, because he is the reason why we sit here in this fort today for many aspects of it, because he is a product of this story. He's a success story of fortitude, of I am a man. I am equal to any other man, not because of the color of my skin. I have intelligence. I have a gift from God, and that likewise I can transform the world that I live in. That's Edward Wilmer Blyden. And for any one of you children that are here with us, take these words, because you could be anything you want to be. And this fort, history is much deeper than Danes coming here and colonizing St. Thomas. And that, yes, it was the seat of government, but it speaks to our story equally. And that likewise, through this and all of what's beyond the walls of this and across the oceans, and going right down to South America, North America, and the stories of Denmark, Bessie, and some of the other personalities that came out of the Virgin Islands, that this little tiny place, there is something special about it that creates and fosters the human beings, and with the tolerance and the fortitude to change the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Hold on. Before we take any questions, just in case, I'll put my one on the spot, and then I can also lean Nadine. Do some. So I will ask you one trivia question from you, one trivia question from Nadine. I'm going to figure out a prize for the winners.
Oh, okay.
So come up with something.
A trip to Washington.
I don't know. I don't think we're allowed to do that. But yeah, but if you think of one question you want to ask God, and whoever answers,
well, I would say A trivia question would be, where is the Gold Coast today?
Where is what's up?
The Gold Coast today.
West Africa?
And the hand was up first.
Oh, hand up. Oh,
She
my
said
bad.
Ghana, so
Okay.
Judy.
Nadine is next.
Nady, you next, you next.
My trivia question is, this space was built by an enslaved person. What is his full name?
Simon Lamar.
We got you. Yeah, are there any other questions? Yes.
I saw you taking notes. I said, oh,
Yes. You got some. Speak loud for those viewers. Yeah.
My question is,
C-H-A.
Marcus Garvey predated Forerunners.
Blighting. Yes. Yes, you are. Africa, for the Africans, those at home and those abroad, Blyden had already made that statement before Marcus Garvey knew himself. And in fact, Edward Wilmer Blyden, Marcus Garvey sought Edward Wilmer Blyden out, and his wife, the first and second wife, spent some time with them in Sierra Leone. So there is a connection between Edward Wilmer Blyden and Marcus Garvey. And likewise, Marcus Garvey had an organization here in St. Thomas. Edith Williams was one of those smart stocks in the Black movement. So in addition to her fighting for women's rights, she was also understanding the importance of Africans at home and those abroad.
But Marcus Garvey's intellectual father was Wilmer Harris.
That is correct.
That's what I was just getting ready to ask about.
Yeah.
I just was getting ready. Okay. let's
And
talk about
who
it.
introduced them?
Socialism.
I introduced him to the Harlem community where he failed terribly, went back, licked his wounds, and came back and was one of the greatest orators of the 20th century.
With Harrison's teacher was Woodford Jackson, the father of David.
That I didn't know. Any other questions?
I have one. Senator Jackson is the one who said, all of the agency, well, it's gonna be the third trivia question. He said, he worked for Conservation and Cultural Affairs. What agency would house that today?
You
Mary Johan just went up just before you. Mary Jo.
DPNR?
There you go.
Can I ask the children? So many of you were so beautiful in your dancing. Can any of you tell us why you decided to dance and why you like it? Yes.
It gets me forward into my culture about how you see
Oh, why do you dance?
Family here. We're family.
Okay. You want to think about it, sir? What about you? Why do you dance? I know you all were talking when I was talking. So I know you have a voice. It makes you feel good. You like the drums, you like the movements, you feel free.
because our ancestors that before we did.
So very good. Very good. Very good point. Okay, that's a young man. Why you join the group?
I'm a journal because I want. So I got prepared for my soul.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
And answers your question?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you all very much. I want to thank you. Congresswoman and her staff. And our staff for hosting us in this special place on a weekend, which is very, very difficult. That they're leaving their families and they came here to open up for us. And we really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'll probably give class the last bite of the apple, but before I do that, Luan, can you set the camera because I'm calling you up in a second here now too. And so I want to thank all the presenters and thank you, Cyril, for sure. Mr. Cyril Baptiste was doing the old-time game presentations. He did some top tweets. He did a little bit of marbles. Next time we're going to try to bring a little bit of some marbles and make sure we have a better board. But he was the last big addition, and you can see I owe you one. So next time I will make sure we lay this down properly for sure. So thank you for that. Yes. Please, when you leave, please take one more trip in the room. You know, you got a bunch of you got bush tea on the side, you got the juices on the right, good stuff in the middle. So please take some of that stuff. And I'm gonna call up Luan Hodge now to call up to acknowledge that people have prepared the food. And before I do that, also can I not go